Nothing can possibly go wrong. There.
Alright, time to watch Disaster Strike. Where's that going?
Ram.
Okay, I need to go faster than that. Wait, but it might stop. It might stop. Okay. Oh no. Disaster! Disaster already!
Hagerswood Middle School is Rithik Kurup.
And Chase Creedon.
We're former grads, and now we're members of the robotics team for Xavier High School.
Our team, the Full Metal Peregrines, Team 17703, are excited to present to you our robot, Monty.
Let's start with talking about what FIRST is. Xavier High School is part of a worldwide robotics league called FIRST. FIRST, formerly known as For Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology, has yearly competitions in 4 different leagues: FLL Junior, FLL, FTC, and FRC. FTC and FRC are the middle school and high school level, FTC being the smaller robots and FRC being the larger robots. Xavier usually has 2 FTC teams and 1 FRC team, but due to COVID restrictions, the school instead consists of 5 FTC teams, the Peregrines being one of them. For this year's FTC challenge, the robot has to pick up rings and shoot them into different goals, while also picking up a wobble goal and dropping it over a wall. The competition consists of an autonomous period where the robot shoots rings and drops the wobble goal on its own using pre-written programming, and a driver-controlled period where we drive the robot, shoot the rings, and drop the wobble goals ourselves.
The maximum robot dimensions in FTC are 18 inches by 18 inches by 18 inches, while FRC's is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. There are 3 periods during a match: autonomous, driver-controlled, also known as teleop, and endgame, adding up to 2 minutes and 30 seconds of robot mania. Autonomous is the robot running by itself to shoot rings through the targets and drop the wobble goal in the indicated zone on the field. The driver-controlled period is pretty straightforward. It is when the drivers control the robot to shoot the rings through the targets. Endgame period is the final 30 seconds of the driver-controlled period. In this period, the drivers control the robot to pick up the wobble goals and move them outside the field.
Gonna have about 10 seconds remaining.
The Full Metal Peregrines have decided to name their robot M.O.N.T.E, which stands for Mobile Omnidirectional Neutralization and Termination Eradicator. We were debating on calling our robot Troubleshooter due to how many issues we were having in the early stages of our build. Our build and programming process of M.O.N.T.E took about 4 months to complete, programming taking up most of that time.
So this is the CAD, or computer-aided design, of our robot. Before we actually build the robot, what we do is we create a CAD, a computer-aided design. What this is, it's basically a 3D model of what we're planning to build. That way we have an idea of what we're going to do before we actually do it, and we can see any problems that we might run into ahead of time, and that just makes the whole build process more efficient. You may have had a Tinkercad station in your tech ed class. I remember one being there. Tinkercad is the more basic version of this. This is SolidWorks, which is like a professional version of CAD. So here, what we have is we have our intake of the robot. It's these green wheels that push the ring up, this little ramp. Then we have the hopper. This is where the rings are stored. And this wheel over here, when it turns, it brings the ring around to the shooter. For the shooter, we have a ring that spins really fast, and when the wheel touches the ring, it goes flying off. and then we get to shoot it into the goal. In the video where I show the final robot design, you'll get a better idea of this, since this is the CAD, so it's not the final design. Here we have the arm. This is what our original plan for the arm was. The final arm, as you will see in the next clip, is a lot different from this, because as we were building it, we found a way better solution for picking up the wobble goal. But what this was is, we have these two gears here that turn. When the motor turns this one, it moves this entire arm out. Here we can pick up the wobble goal. So we have the servo that opens up with a channel attached. What the plan was for this arm was the wobble goal would go in between here and this would close, and then we could lift up the entire arm with the wobble goal in it, and we could bring it over the wall. And then after it would be done, it would just rest on this plate so it wouldn't be hanging out and it wouldn't get in the way of the hopper. Now, when we were actually building this, we realized that we didn't have this space, and we also didn't want this motor to be sticking out the back, because this was a structural hazard, because if something bumps into that motor, it could cause all this to break. So what we ended up doing is we changed it so the arm went back and forth instead of side to side. In the final design, we don't have this gear system. We have something else called a worm gear, which I will explain in the other video where I show the final design. This one was not as strong, and it wasn't able to lift up all of it, which is why we went with the final version, the worm gear. Here, which you will see in the final design we kept, is a 2-floor system, where here we have the electronics. This is the rev hub. This is where all the code is stored, and it gives the commands to the motors. And we would have all the wiring all down here. And then the second floor is where the hopper is. This is where the rings are, and it goes into the shooter. Now again, this CAD version is pretty different from what our final one was, because as we were building it, we realized that having the whole structure attached like this, where the channels are next to each other, was not strong at all, because it would cause it to bend. So what we did is these channels are under this, under these two, and over them as well, so that way it was a lot stronger. And so our final robot is a lot thinner than this, so it easily fits within the size restraint when it comes to the width, while this one was over, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, that is our CAD design. Now in the next video, I will show you the final design, where I will explain what these wheels are, and I'll go into more detail on how the whole shooting, intake, and hopper system works. Alright, so this is our actual robot. You can see it is very different from the CAD. It still has the intake, hopper, and shooter, like the same general idea, but the actual dimensions, the way we built it, is very different. So first, I'm going to go and show the frame. So as you can see here, the way we secured the frame is we had the two channels that had the wheels, and then we connected them by putting channels across, like the bottom and the top. Before, they were like, these things were next to them, and so that wasn't as strong because it would bend. So now it's a lot more stronger. Now the biggest thing we changed in the final design is the arm. Right now I'll show you what this new arm is like. So the problem with the old arm design is that it was not very strong, and whenever we let go of the button to turn it on, it would just fall because there wasn't any power going to the motor anymore. So what we did instead is we replaced it with this thing called a worm gear. So now a worm gear is a special type of gear where there's a corkscrew that's connected to the motor. This one, it will turn because the motor is connected to it. Now when this corkscrew turns, it slowly turns this gear over here. See, if I spin this, it spins the top gear. And now what's good about a worm gear is it only moves in one direction. If there's something heavy on this top gear, it won't move because the corkscrew won't allow it. It will only move from one direction. So this is a lot stronger. So this is what we ended up doing for our final arm. We have a worm gear that's connected to the motor, and then that is all connected to this arm. Now this arm's wrist is also pretty different because we needed to make a way that we could preload the wobble goal without having to pick it up, and it could just hold it in place, because for the autonomous period it has to place it without picking it up. So it has to be on the robot before the match starts. So that's why we have this new wrist over here. As you can see, it's just a servo connected to this plate that moves like that. Fortunately, I don't have a wobble goal here, so I can't show it in action, but I can show the arm itself moving. And so for the worm gear, if I move it, when I let go, because it can only be pushed from one direction, the arm is stuck like that. And that's really helpful when we're picking up the wobble goal, because we don't have to hold down the button. We can just let go and it gets stuck there. So it can hold things in place mid-air. And quickly show what that looks like. This is the driver station. This phone is connected to the controllers and it sends the commands from the controller input to the rev hub that's in the robot. That's how we get the commands to the robot so we can drive it wirelessly. Now if I play the code, arm moves down like that. We open the wrist and we close it and we just bring it back. Now, a thing for this competition, as you can see from some of our fail videos at the beginning of the video, this worm gear setup, because of the weight of this arm itself, it is very weak and it tends to break for autonomous. In teleop, or the driver control period, it's fine because we're manually controlling it, but in autonomous, it does pre-programmed code, so it tends to break the arm by itself. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. So we were able to fix this by making sure that the arm was set up in a particular way that would prevent it from breaking. But for the future competitions, as you can see, there's this bar here that isn't in the recordings of our match. We plan on putting a new arm here that is purely for the autonomous, that holds the wobble goal on its own, drops it into the squares in the field, where this arm is only used for teleop. So that way we can have a consistent autonomous wobble goal without having to worry about it breaking. Alright, so that's our arm. I want to go into some detail on the wheels. So if you don't know what these are called mechanism wheels. They're these wheels that have these rollers on them. And what these wheels allow you to do is if this wheel and this wheel move in one direction, and then these two move in the other direction, it allows the robot to slide left to right. You'll see in our recordings of the match, our robot can slide side to side when we aim, and that's really helpful because it just makes aiming a lot quicker and more efficient. So we can score more points in less time. So now I'm going to go into detail on the intake. So there's a bit of stuff in the way, but the intake is this one motor on this side. And it's connected to this top axle with these green wheels on them. These wheels are called compliant wheels. They're kind of squishy and they grip onto the rings really well. That one motor is directly connected to that top axle, and then that axle is chained to this middle axle, and then that axle is chained to the bottom one. So what happens is when they're all chained together, when the motor is turned on, all of them move. This one's kind of in the way. That allows us to intake the rings. They suck in the ring from the bottom and they bring it up through the intake. And then we have this hopper wheel. So what this wheel does, when you turn it on, it takes the ring from the intake, turns it around, and then puts it into the shooter. And then the shooter is just a really fast wheel. That one, it shoots the ring really quickly. I have a little target over there so you can see how far it can shoot. I'm going to quickly demonstrate the robot sucking in a ring and shooting it. So I have a ring there. I'm going to just put it right in front of the intake. Once I suck it in, it is now there. So I have to ramp up the shooter. And then shoots it. I'll show a better angle so you can see how far it can shoot. So yeah, that's our intake and shooting. Now on the back, you can also see this is our license plate that we CAD'd and 3D printed using that 3D printer over there. It says M.O.N.T.E, our team number, and then our team name, the Peregrines.
Hi guys, I'm Aiden Pesh. I'm the lead programmer for the Peregrines. Today I'm going to be telling you about the basics of programming a robot. So, when we start off on our programming journey, we have to learn the basics, and we do this by exploring FTC Simulator. This is an application that allows us to understand the basic concepts behind programming a robot, such as making a robot move by itself and assigning controls to an Xbox controller that allows the user to control the robot later on. Once we have those concepts mastered, we move on to Android Studio, the application that we use to actually program our robot. In Android Studio, we write code so the robot can perform various tasks, whether it is the user who controls the robot or if it's the robot actually controlling itself. In this year's game, there are a whole bunch of tasks for us to complete, and our robot is able to shoot discs all by itself. It's able to use vision to recognize what a stack of rings looks like, and then, depending on what it sees, it has to go to a certain area, and once it reaches that area, it has to drop the wobble goal all by itself. And to make things even more complicated, once it drops a wobble goal, it has to return to the parking line just so we get extra points. This is my code for our robot. You can see through the @teleop that it is going to be in teleop class. What that means is our robot will be controlled by the user. Its group is 17703, the team number for the Full Metal Peregrines. Down here, we declare our variables, which include motors and servos. The difference between a motor and a servo is that a motor is a mounted axis that spins multiple times, whereas a servo has a hinge which goes from 180 degrees to 0. It can't go beyond that. Down here, we have our main method, which is called run_op_mode. Every class needs a run_op_mode method. In here, we declare our variables, assigning the special motors to the motor variables that we had created earlier. Similarly, we do this with the servos, the shooters, poppers, and the intake. Altogether, this allows our robot to get the proper stuff and then to run. Wait for start means that this code will not run until the user presses the start button on the phone, also known as the driver station. Once that happens, this telemetry statement will be displayed. Telemetry is data that is displayed on the phone, telling the user what's going on with the robot. Down here, we have 3 different variables. We have power strafe, power forward, and power turn, which we set to intake values from the joysticks on an Xbox controller. What this then does is, using a specific formula for a mecanum drive, our robot can move when our drivers use the Xbox controller. If we press left trigger, it will move super slow. If we press right trigger, it will move at a medium speed. And if we don't press anything, it will move at normal speed. Next, we have the bumpers. If we press the left bumper, we will raise the wobble motor. If we press the right, we will lower it. Otherwise, the power will be set to 0 to prevent it from moving by itself. To close the wrist, we press X on the controller. And if we want to open it, we would press B. Down here, we have the shooter. When we press Y, we set the velocity of the shooter to 1750 RPMs. That's pretty fast. That's 1,750 rotations per minute. Finally, if we press the right trigger, we will intake discs. This allows us to feed discs to our shooter and then to shoot them. If we press the left trigger, we can reverse the flow of the disc, and that will send them out. This is very useful in case any of them get stuck. Otherwise, if we're not pressing anything, the power will be 0, so it does not move. Yeah, that's good. Right there. Right there.
Yeah, that is super convenient.
Good.
You should have 2 wobble endgames before this year. 25-point autonomous isn't the best we could do, but it still works.
20 point.
Oh, 20 point, right.
It's better than our last few.
No.
Autonomous over.
Alright, time it now.
Yeah, rest those 2 to the left.
Yeah, those 2 over there. 1.
Whoa, one at a time.
Okay, and that. Alright, let's go up there. Let's go through. Alright, Jared, hold off. I say come back. Yeah. I say up to that one, then go through. Single? Yeah. Single. And then let's go to the left. Or to the right, so we'll do right now. Oh, that one? Yeah. That one and that one. No, there we go. 2. Right, and up. So, 1, 2, and there. Up there. Yeah.
Nice job.
Here, and let's get this one too.
Oh, it's on the side.
wheel, it's on the wheel.
Oh, you get that one. Go back.
Come back. Alright, back here.
Oh, actually, yeah, those are good.
Alright.
Alright, go these 2 shots and start to maybe pick up bubble.
I say go Yeah.
Get that one. You got time. Reverse. Bubble.
Alright. Ready? Back.
Lift your arm up.
Go. Alright.
Alright, arm is working.
Go here. Right. Okay.
Got it?
Go.
Gonna have about 10 seconds remaining.
Let's go. Power top.
I'm gonna do a good thing.
Wait, ready? Back.
I can't really
Despite our robot being complete, we are still improving and changing parts of M.O.N.T.E to make him better. We want to try out a new design for the wobble arm and hand and try to add to our code to increase our robot's ability to score points in the next competition.